Welcome to Oregon People's Rebate, a deep dive into ballot measure work. My name is Chelsea Wilkinson, and I'm a member of the Planning Committee for this year's conference. This session is brought to you by the generous support of our sponsors, the Gerald Huff Fund for Humanity, Humanity Forward Foundation, Aid Kit, and STEADY. Before we begin, please be aware that this session is being recorded and it will be available to view on Crowdcast after the conference. And you can visit the conference website for more information. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. Antonio Gisbert is a former scientist and union organizer whose passion for economic justice led him to organize the Oregon People's Rebate, a people-powered statewide ballot initiative campaign to leverage increased corporate tax justice to alleviate poverty in Oregon through universal yearly direct cash transfers. And Anthony Johnson is a former criminal defense attorney. Anthony has been the chief petitioner for 3 Oregon statewide ballot measures to reform the state's criminal justice system, helping measures 91 and 110 both win strong majorities at the ballot box. He's currently serving as political director for the Oregon People's Rebate. That's supporting a grassroots initiative to bring some justice to the state's economic system. Okay, so this question is for Antonio. The Oregon People's Rebate is the first of its kind. What is the Oregon People's Rebate? What would it do, and how would it be implemented?
Thank you, Chelsea, and hello, everybody. So the Oregon People's Rebate is a statewide ballot initiative here in Oregon. It's pretty straightforward. The whole thing is only 4 pages of proposed legislation. There's 2 parts to it. The first part is the revenue side. Currently in Oregon, large corporations, so I think of Comcast, the exact threshold is $25 million of yearly revenue within the state of Oregon. So large corporations, or the tax rate after $25 million of in-state revenue currently is less than 1/8 of 1%. We think that that is not the right number for taxing giant corporations. And what we propose to do is to increase that minimum tax rate to 3%. That generates about $3 billion of revenue per year. That's a conservative estimate. And the second part of the initiative is, what do we do with these $3 billion? And the answer is really simple. We just rebate it to every Oregonian. And a couple of things about that that are really important is that when we say every Oregonian, we really mean every human being who calls Oregon their state or their home state. The way we operationalize that is to say that anybody who spends at least part of 200 days in the state of Oregon is eligible to claim the rebate. So that includes, for example, folks who are normally outside of most social programs. For example, our unhoused neighbors, our undocumented neighbors, and incarcerated neighbors. And that is really important, that when we try to address economic justice, that we bring everybody along with us and not leave out, particularly not historically marginalized populations. So that's the Oregon People's Rebate in like a super brief thing. A couple of things that is also important in this conversation. The Oregon People's Rebate will come out to about $750 per person per year. That's a conservative estimate. So a family of 4 will get 4 rebates for about $3,000. The rebate is not taxable and does not count as income for benefit purposes in the state of Oregon. In the parlance of the community, we say that it stacks on top of any other benefits. It turns out that that is a lot harder to do than you'd think it is, but we think that we did it right. And that, I think, is it at like a super macro level. I do want to make sure that that I am particularly talking about things that interest you in the audience. So please direct me, either questions or or another time to make sure that I'm touching on the issues that are important to you. So, thank you.
Awesome. That was like a great high-level overview. One of my favorite things about the Oregon People's Rebate is that it's really come from the grassroots. Can you kind of walk us through the origin story of the Oregon People's Rebate?
Thank you for asking this question because I love reminiscing about how this came about. So we are super people-powered. Originally, the idea came to me, or the seed of the idea came to me while enjoying some adult beverages with a friend of mine in Eugene, Oregon, which is rural Oregon, for those of you not from the state. And the innovation here is that from that seed idea, I convened a group of community members, my friends, to come together and try to really build out what the Oregon People's Rebate is. So that process took about 8 months. We met almost every weekend, and it was really a core group of about 12 of us. And it's really important to highlight the radical diversity in this group of friends. So not only were we diverse in terms of race and age, but importantly as well, lived experience. So for example, out of those 12 folks who met just about every weekend for about 8 months, there's a registered Republican, a bunch of Democrats, a bunch of Pacific Green Party members, independent voters, and even an anarcho-communist, right? So we had that. So this was a group of people who met to discuss how to imagine a more just Oregon with the context of like corporate tax justice. One person in the room is a veteran, others are not. We have people with like professional degrees. Also, some of the folks there just had GEDs, and even 3 of the folk at the time where we were drafting this ballot initiative were actually experiencing some degree of houselessness, right? So somebody is currently still living in a shed, another person lives in a van, and then the third person just couch surfs. And this is important because it is who we are, right? We are people-centered. And it's really a radical exercise in democracy in the sense that everybody is, laws are just like are written down, codified expressions of our values. That's really what a law is, right? We think that killing people is wrong, so we make a law about it. A critical thing is that everybody, no matter what their background is equally capable of expressing their morals and their ethics. And then my role in that conversation was to facilitate a consensus-driven process of putting people's vision into this 4-page document. And it was a really radical, awesome, life-altering experience that I'm super proud of it. And I'm just so privileged to have been part of it, just because people are just awesome. And that just fills my heart with hope and love, And so then this is kind of that's the way we did it. It's totally fine. I think it works really well for us. And I want to sort of invite everybody watching this, participating in this conversation, to think about how it is that you come up with proposed legislation, or how laws get written, right? So to be super pointed about it, in I think the early 80s, some legislators met to figure out what the right corporate tax rate ought to be for giant corporations. And you could imagine that was a series of meetings, and they came up with less than 1/8 of 1%. Okay, and that's, so that group of people, that was their proposed solution, and that's fine, but our group of people came up with a different number, and a different thing to do with the money. And so that speaks to the power of representation. And when we do things, we need to be real conscientious to look around the room and make sure that we have the people who we need in the room when decisions are getting made. Because otherwise, you get results that seem ridiculous, like taxing Comcast less than 1/8 of 1%. Like, that just makes no sense to me. So.
Yeah, if I could add on, being in Antonio's place, the chief petitioner in 3 statewide ballot measures, have been real inspired by how he's come from his days in a coffee shop, working on this for a couple of years. I joined later in the process, and seeing the momentum snowball from that those coffee shop meetings, to now getting national attention, and at a time when federal government can seem like so out of touch with your beliefs and the beliefs of you and your community. The initiative process that we have in Oregon and other states is a real opportunity for not only Oregonians, but people who believe in this cause from across the nation to help this effort, because success in Oregon, as we've seen with other policies, can lead to success in Washington, California, Colorado, and spread across the nation.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would love to ask Antonio, because I think a lot of people are really interested in consensus-driven work and working with kind of that grassroots. How do you build and create something like legislation? From that 8-month experience, what is maybe a something to keep in mind if you would to share advice or wisdom from that experience to someone that's interested in wanting to take something like that on?
Wow, great question. I think that the couple key things. Number one, always trust people. Like the people are awesome, and just that, period. And the consensus-driven process, right? It can be slow and challenging at times. But a good facilitation is sort of is about, to me, sort of asking the open-ended question like, tell me more about that. And so there's a whole bunch of ideas that we left on the cutting room floor, per se, that we brawled it out in a friendly way, for weeks, because some folks felt really strongly that we needed this thing and other folks didn't. And you have to have a lot of patience. It is care work, flat out, and that's just what it is. And just but it's care work, and the foundation is trust. So everybody in that room trusted each other, that we all had good intentions, and we might have had different opinions, but it's sort of okay. And we had a long conversation. One thing that I think was an advantage for us is that we were all friends before. I was friends with everybody before. So I convened my friends, who are awesome people, just by happy chance. And so then that really worked. If we had all been 12 strangers, that would have been probably more difficult, or it would have required more time. So then I would say building time for just socializing and relaxing to get the group to come together. We did have a lot of snacks. We made a point to always meet in places with windows. That's just a personal preference of mine, right? If you're in a cave, it's hard to be creative. Care work. So one of the members didn't have easy transportation, so I had to drive to get him, to bring them to the meeting, because otherwise this person could not participate. And that's what you got to do.
Yeah.
People who are unhoused have spotty internet service at home. That's kind of like a joke, sorry. And so like you cannot expect to send them like stuff to read and prepare for the meeting because it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so you really have to build the system, the process, so that it's like inclusive and everybody can fully participate.
Yeah, you really like met people where they're at, but they also, I feel like a important part of that was like you built community first, which was just like your friends, and the time, you know, that it took, whether you think it's not a part of that project yet, actually was because you were building trust and building community with those friends.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. One thing I wanted to ask was why direct cash and why universal? Like, why did those two things come out of this like process?
Yeah, thank you. So the initial sort of seed was that Occupy Wall Street chant, banks got bailed out, we got sold out. And so that was kind of like an early anchor. And then just by happy chance, two of the folk in the room were from Alaska. And so they had the experience of the Alaska Permanent Fund dividend. And they were both like, this like really helped our family like manage like the poverty that we grew up with. And so it just became a natural idea. Like, wouldn't it just be better if we all had a little bit, like not a little bit, if we all had like more economic resources to do us, to just live life better. And so that seemed like it was a really easy point to get to. As far as like the universality of it, it's a super loaded word, acknowledging. But I think that comes from like the sense of like people's, the group had a sense of justice that was inclusive to every human being, which is kind of radical it shouldn't be, but it is for whatever reason. And so it's tricky to provide benefits to people who are outside or on the margin of like the legal framework of society today. By happy chance in Oregon, a couple years back, Reina Lopez and amazing people at Pecun and a bunch of other folks, they got together and passed what is called a driver's license for all bill or law. So it's this idea that if you're undocumented and you get pulled over for not having a driver's license, it's like super bad for your life and like your family's life, and like often that leads to like people getting deported. So if you just like help people get driver's licenses when they get pulled over for whatever, right? It's just a normal speeding ticket. It doesn't lead to like a super bad outcome. And so we were happy that was already built in the state legislature, like it was already passed as a law. So we just like literally like copied and pasted it and dumped it into our initiative petition. So that was like a super, we had wanted to include everybody regardless of status. And then it dawned upon us that we could just copy and paste that. And so if you can get a driver's license, you can get the Oregon People's Rebate. It's
Nice.
that easy.
Yeah, and as someone who joined the campaign late to learn about it, about direct cash, you learn about direct cash, it works. You get money to people. So many issues in society have to do with poverty, and as Antonio is fond of saying, you give people money, they're less likely to be poor. They're less likely to be experiencing poverty, and so direct cash works. So you see it in pilot programs. We've seen it with the child tax credit nationally. It drastically reduced child poverty. And of all the things the government spends money on, how about having less hungry kids, less kids suffering from poverty? And then the universality aspect of it, as loaded as that word may be, that allows buy-in from everybody. It doesn't set up, some people get it, some other people don't. So think about everybody has access to the public library. I think we'd rather have fire protection from the fire department, not be means tested, and right? So it's a similar concept that everybody is involved and everybody has a part in it. And if people that, if they feel like they don't need the rebate, then they can spend it as they want. They can not get it and spread the money around. They can donate it to a good cause. So let's have everybody buy in. Let's have everybody not have any stigma associated with it, because this isn't something that, you have to, prove anything, prove how poor you are, your poverty situation. Just everybody gets it. Everybody puts this money back in the local economy. We trust citizens to spend the money on what they need, and it has everybody buy in and brings a better, solid foundation to the policy with everyone having a buy-in.
Nice. Yeah, well, and it makes sense for the Oregon People's Rebate, which is this like corporate tax that then, all of that would get rebated to everyone. And so because for, everyone can get their products or can purchase them too.
Yeah, and Antonio's mentioned the Alaskan dividend. The Alaska oil dividend, Alaska has oil. And so the proceeds of that oil are spread across to all the residents. Oregon, we don't have oil we're drilling for, but we do have corporations not paying enough in taxes. So we have corporations making record-breaking profits. We have the ability to bring some tax fairness and then uplift everyday Oregonians. That's a good policy in my book.
Absolutely. I love that, Anthony, you kind of have come later into the Oregon People's Rebate world. And one of the things that you experienced with Antonio in this work is the polling that you did. I'd love for you to share what you guys learned from the polling you conducted here in Oregon, and how it informed maybe the messaging that
Yeah, so the polling shows that Oregonians are, split on the issue, but that we are in striking distance of winning. And we can win the more we educate people, the more people learn about the issue, the more that people understand that this applies to everyone. When they first read the ballot title, they may not know that the rebate includes them. It includes everybody. So everybody needs to know that it is universal. It goes to everybody. Everybody is included. Also, the benefits of it, of decreasing child poverty across the state, and the economic impact of putting that money back directly into your local community. So whether you're in Portland, Bend, Eugene, Medford, Pendleton, instead of those profits going to the corporate headquarters of Comcast, now these profits are being used to uplift everyday Oregonians, put that money right back into local coffee shops, food carts, whatever it may be, the businesses you want to support. So we know that the more that people learn about it, the more they're likely to support it. And people overwhelmingly understand that corporations are not paying their fair share of taxes, so that's number one. So that goes across the board, no matter what your political affiliation. And then we have to get people used to the fact that this will go to everyone, uplift everyone, and we're not going to create a burdensome bureaucracy that's going to stifle this. We're going to collect the money, turn around, give to everybody, put it right back into our economy.
Awesome. And Anthony, from your experience on multiple ballot initiatives, what was your takeaway from that polling, kind of in contrast with all the other ballot initiative work that you've done?
Yeah, so this actually reminds me of early drug policy reform work. Doing my first initiative I helped put on the ballot was a local measure 20 years ago. And so you see people's views change and over time as they become more and more educated. So what we see about concepts like people's rebate or basic income guarantees in general, there's an education process that needs to take place. And Antonio's been doing a great job of that, of not taking any vote for granted. So you take this issue to conservative areas, to rural areas, collect signatures all across the state, try to hit every county, and don't back away from any arguments, because there are libertarian, conservative, progressive, liberal reasons to support a policy like this. So takeaway that I've seen is there's some education to do, but you keep talking about the benefits of the measure in plain language. The more that people learn about it, the more that they're going to like it.
If I may add to that. So it's a component of leadership, which is kind of like a scary word sometimes, but it's really important that that we appreciate our position in the space. It's we are leading a change. It's perhaps uncomfortable, but that is the reality of it. And so it's okay if not everybody's on board yet, right? We are in the vanguard, and we're going forward. And so, like, with humility, of course, but that's a thing. And so, don't be deterred. If somebody doesn't is lukewarm or doesn't like the idea just yet, that's fine. You know, like we are doing this work. We're doing this work and we're leading this work. So of course, it's already not law. It's not already obvious, and that's okay. You know.
Yeah, that's a very beautiful and caring sentiment. And I know from kind of the work that you've done, one of the things that's kind of unique about Oregon People's Rebate is that you, in getting the signatures, most people know that Portland has the highest density population, and so they will just kind of go for Portland. But I'd love to hear about why Oregon People's Rebate isn't doing that, and the work that's gone into sticking to it.
Yeah, thank you. It is the Oregon People's Rebate, not the Portland People's Rebate. We love Portland, nothing wrong with Portland, but it's a state thing. And so we feel that everybody in the state should have a reasonably equal opportunity to participate in whatever capacity they want to. And so we were born outside of Portland. That's just like an accident of history, whatever. And so and that's okay. To date, we have signatures from at least 30 of 36 counties, but that figure is super old. So I think I could easily bet that we have signatures from all 36 counties by now. I just haven't had a chance to count in a long time. Yeah, I think that. From a principal perspective, it's important to have conversations in neighborhoods or communities that are perhaps a little bit out of reach. So we spent a lot of time in the early days canvassing in rural Oregon, in much more politically conservative parts of the state. We think that it is important to hear everybody out and to engage as many people as possible. Of course, we're not going to be able to engage everybody because time is not infinite. But so we agree with that from a philosophical perspective, if you will, but also there's a practical component of it, that what we are doing is that we're changing the state law. We're trying to change the state law, I should say. And there's still a state legislature that they have a job to do. And so it's important that folks in the state legislature be aware and know that people in their own districts are also supportive of this ballot initiative. And so if we just focused in Portland, we would say the Portland delegation would be strongly in support, and that would be great, but then everybody in the state might not have the same buy-in in shepherding and making sure that the law that we're trying to make actually sticks and is carried out faithfully. It's a little bit technical, but after we pass, we need to get enough signatures to go out for the ballot. We need to get a majority of voters to vote for it, and then afterwards, there's going to be what's called rulemaking, where the little details that we cannot fit in the 4 pages of proposed law get sorted out, and that's a common process. It happens for everything. But we need to be aware that is going to happen, and so we need to make sure that the people in the room are representative and have buy-in into making the Oregon People's Rebate the best possible version of itself. So
Yeah, and it's one difference between running, say, a candidate campaign versus a policy or movement campaign. So a candidate, is up for election every 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, whatever it may be for the office. They just need to win. They just need 50% plus one vote. They win, they stay in office. A policy like Oregon People's Rebate or any other policy, when you pass it, there's going to be rulemaking, like Antonio said, and then every legislative session, there's likely to be some type of legislation that impacts this law, either to restrict it or build upon it. And if you're part of a movement and you see the Oregon People's Rebate as part of a nationwide movement to bring either tax fairness or direct cash directly to people to reduce poverty and the impacts of poverty, if you build that movement, get good information, and protect it and build upon that, then you can see that it can be replicated in other states. But if you just care about winning the election and that's it, then you don't get the same buy-in like Antonio had mentioned. And it could be crucial for a conservative candidate whose county may not support by a majority the Oregon People's Rebate, but the fact that 40% would vote for it or 45% would vote for it, for them to know that they have that kind of constituency is important to get them to understand that this will benefit their districts as well. But if people in conservative rural districts outside of Portland feel like you've taken them for granted, you haven't listened to them at all, then they're likely to be much more antagonistic. They're much likely to know the benefits this will have for their community. So when you're building a broad movement, making this a nonpartisan issue that uplifts everybody, no matter where you live, is the right way to go.
Very cool.
Thank you.
I just want to check on time. Okay. Okay, 3:30. What time does it end? Oh, okay, cool. Thank you. So I would love to ask you guys, where is the ballot initiative currently, and what are its next steps?
Yeah, thank you. So a couple of weeks ago, we did some math to assess the signature gathering campaign, and unfortunately, it seemed to us that getting the required signatures by July 8, which is the deadline, was not going to be possible. And so it's super sad, and it really stinks, right? Because if the Oregon People's Rebate is going to decrease child poverty in Oregon by 26%, to put that off by 2 years, that's real. That's a bad thing, right? But at the same time, there's mathematical reality, and we need to be aware of that. So we suspended 22 signature gathering campaign, and what we're currently doing is we are already working on 2024. Where we are now is that we are no piece of legislation, just like literature, is ever perfect, and so we are re-revising for a bazillionth time the text of the initiative. We have sent it out to our partners to make sure that everybody has a chance to provide feedback if they want to. There's a couple little things that we want to strengthen, mostly details. And surely there's a way to do it. For example, there's a section of the language where we talk about making sure that low-income folks are not harmed by receiving this cash. And so we've built in 4 levels of protection for these folks, but maybe a 5th one would be appropriate, or some other thing. And so we're double checking everything, but we expect to start collecting signatures again in September of 2022, so in a few months. The way the process is, super brief, is that you first have to collect between 1,000 and 2,000 signatures. That's called the sponsorship phase. Then that gets submitted to the state. There's a whole bunch of legal back and forth. It takes about 6 months. And then you are, hopefully, we should be allowed to start collecting signatures again. So that puts us back into March 2023, starting to collect signatures for July 8th. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if it's July 8th because it's the second Friday of July, but early July 2024. So we'll have about a year, almost a year and a half to collect signatures. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I say after being a part of campaigns that have won at the ballot box, you learn that the work doesn't end. There's still more work to be done, be it rulemaking or at the legislature. And being a part of campaigns that haven't met their ultimate goal, either losing the ballot box or not gathering the signatures necessary, you see the work still continues. And that also that you had victories along the way. You built upon your initial foundation, you've built upon your initial coalition, and you've grown that. And so one thing that Antonio has done is help build a momentum towards a movement that started in coffee shops that's now getting statewide attention, national attention. And so the policy, the campaign is in so much better position for 2024 with more support, bigger foundation, a little more money in the bank, and so the prospects of 2024 are really great.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like from what you all have shared is that, you aren't really, your first goal isn't necessarily just to win. There's clearly so many different factors that you've built into this process, such as like making sure your community is like so well informed that it's like consensus driven, that it was built as inclusive as possible, and then that you're also, communicating it out to all of Oregon, not just seeing like a high density population and just getting the numbers. And so it sounds like the process, while it's taking a little longer, is also being built like really purposefully. And I think that will make for a really good 2024 ballot initiative that then voters will vote for. One of the things Antonio mentioned was that you wanted to possibly include another, protection and for low income so that they aren't harmed. And I know that in kind of basic income work, like that fear of low income or people receiving benefits that would receive basic income having a net negative impact to their current benefits is something like that is talked about greatly in our movement. Can you share like a little bit of what those different texts that you included or safety protocols are?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Yeah, that to me personally was the biggest lesson to me in the process of drafting the initiative, is exactly how difficult it is to give low-income people money. Like that really caught me by surprise, and we super racked our brain about it. And so hopefully I don't forget any of them. I'm pretty sure there's 4. The good thing about writing law is that you can just like write in the law, this rebate does not count as income for benefit purposes. And it's like, well, we just made law. and so like, that'd be one.
Oh, it's this simple.
Yeah, right, it's that simple. But it's not that simple. So then there's a couple other things. So there's that. And by the way, we think that it is lawful to say that, by the way. So it's okay. Then we also built this thing that we call the hold harmless provision, which is that if anybody loses a benefit because they have received the rebate, that the state makes them whole by providing a similar, same or similar benefit. And that is funded with the new revenue. And so it is revenue, it doesn't cost the state any money, right? It just means that if for example, if I'm going to get, $100 less of SNAP, then I would get my portion of the rebate plus $100 on top of it to buy food or whatever. And so then what that means is that instead of me and everybody else getting $750, maybe I would get $749.50, just because myself and a whole bunch of other people have lost $100, for example. So it's kind of like a pretty neat, like self-contained, like protective way of making sure that nobody is worse off because they've received the benefit. there is another level of protection that trust is super important, as we talked before. And so people can actually claim the rebate, decline the rebate, or do neither. And that is really important. So obviously, if you claim the rebate, you get the money. If you decline the rebate, you affirmatively decline it, your rebate goes into the general fund to pay for public education, healthcare, and senior services, public K-12 education. But you can also do neither, which allows you to wait to see how the law is gonna work itself out. And if you do neither, your portion of the rebate basically gets put back into the pool for the following year for everybody else, yourself and everybody else, excuse me. And now that's important because there's a legal theory that if you decline the rebate, then technically that was yours to decline for like a split second, like that money was in your pocket for a split second. So if you decline the rebate and it is considered taxable income, then like you would have to pay taxes on it. And that took us a while to figure that out, but we did. And so it's a little bit clunky sounding, but it should be pretty easy, right? Because when you file your taxes, or when you use a separate form to claim the rebate, not while you file taxes, you will have that option to accept it or decline it. And so then that's a third level. And then the fourth thing that we did is that we empower the congressional legislation, the congressional delegation, to work it out with the IRS to make sure that this is not taxable. Now, that's a little bit more like you can't force people to do things. So we'll see whether it's not mandatory for them to try to work out a deal with the federal government and the IRS, but it's a nudge in the right direction. So it's a little soft, but it's like, hey, folks, help us out, and we'll see what happens.
And that's part of the building the movement. You know, we've seen that federally with cannabis policy. So even though cannabis remains illegal at the federal level, the federal government has decided in states where it's legal, if you're operating within that law, we're not going to enforce federal law. So to have a statewide campaign to get broad support, now we're going to have our congressional delegation going to want to protect and respect the will of the voters. And the will of the voters is this does not impact your benefit status. And so now we've empowered and those legislators backed by the people that they represent to fight for us at the national level and work for solutions that benefit the state.
Awesome. Wow. Well, you just have learned, you've taken so much from other ballot initiatives, as we've heard, and kind of, tried to build the best.
Yeah.
So I'd love to take some time to be able to get any questions from the audience. Yeah. I think the mics, yeah, or, okay.
First of all, thank you both. This is really interesting to hear about. I have two questions.
Oh, can we do in the mic?
Yeah.
Okay.
You hear the mic? Okay.
Yep.
So my first question is for Antonio. When Chelsea was introducing you, she mentioned that you have a background in labor organizing. So I was just kind of thinking, with the kind of current momentum there is behind unionizing in these huge corporations and the kind of, we heard in the Great Reshuffling panel earlier today, just the kind of consciousness of these systems that are happening and people pushing back against them. I'm wondering if you've already kind of started to make connections between OPR's work and that momentum, just because part of OPR is taxing corporations more and pushing back against this really, really low tax rate, and kind of if that work is already happening or kind of what possibilities you see for the future, kind of connecting those movements. And then the second question is for both of you, and I just am curious because I know doing this really deep, involved work, canvassing, pounding the pavement, there's always stories that come with that. So I'm just wondering if both of you have kind of a favorite like moment or story or conversation in your work that felt kind of inspiring or transformative.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I used to be a union organizer and a union rep, which gave me like a crash course, like quasi-legal training background, which is super helpful when you're drafting legislation. And yeah, I mean, like the labor movement is, when the labor movement's at its best, it's about social and economic justice. It would be hard-pressed to say that we are not doing social and economic justice here. And so, in a sense, when we're all at our best, there's very little gap. I feel that when we're at our best, there's very little gap between organized labor and the Oregon People's Rebate. People in labor unions generally understand money pretty well, and so it just turns out that for like the typical Oregon family, getting the Oregon People's Rebate is like a pay increase of 4%. And so like union members and union leaders sort of understand that a 4% COLA is like generally a good thing. And so nobody's really gonna like throw a rock at it. I mean, unless, or I'm sure somebody might, but it sort of seems like pretty straightforward. The fact that, in the House of Labor is giant, right? So one of the, not recent, a few years back, there was this idea called bargaining for the common good, which is sort of looking outside of, this is a super oversimplification, I apologize for like anybody who's like super deep into like organized labor. But the basic idea is that you could just bargain to make like your personal working conditions better, and that is definitely good because you're a human being and you deserve dignity. But you can also go outside of the contract and try to like fight for a more just society, right? And so within that context, it seems consistent with these union values that are like massively, I would say, pro-social. And specifically, yes, we have reached out to a bunch of labor unions, and like some are like really supportive, and some are not really supportive yet. And part of that is, and this is kind of like bad on us, that we are super people powered, and we have like not enough capacity to talk to all the people that who we need to talk to, just because we're like super small. But now that we have a little bit more time, of course, it makes it a bit easier to have these conversations. We're coming into like resources, so we can do more, and so it's super exciting. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Do you want to?
So I have a story for the campaign that touches on both. Working with polling companies in the past, we were shopping around or trying to get bids for polling for Oregon People's Rebate, and contacted two polling firms I've worked with in the past. One polling firm said, we represent big corporate clients that probably aren't gonna like your measure, so we have a conflict of interest, we're not gonna be able to work with you, but I will tell you that anti-corporate sentiment, or the notion that corporations aren't paying their fair share of taxes, is alarming our clients because it's becoming more widespread across the state. And then the other polling company that we ended up working with was like, I know that labor unions across Oregon are going to be interested in this measure. We're going to have to check with our labor allies and clients to make sure they're okay with this, and we got a call back within like 5 minutes. I go, yeah, they said that this is good to go. So, so good stuff for that. And I know, Antonio, I think it'd be worthwhile to share your experience about unlikely people signing the measure, or when you're in rural conservative places, how that worked out for you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, two super quick stories. So good organizing, the way I was taught, is that it's like 70 or 80% listening and 20 or 30% talking. And really, when we're talking to people about like the work that we do, like that's organizing work. And so people understand. One of the things that we say is, could you use $750? And that's a open-ended question. That's a prompt that allows folks to process the information and tell you a story. And so it's a lot of listening, and like you have to be comfortable listening, which is, so it feels really awkward for me to have a microphone in front of my face. By the way, that's kind of why. But so we go, we organize all over the state, and there's one, I bumped into a family going to the Salem State Fair, and it was like the dad person, the mom person, a stroller with a child, and then two other kids running around. And they were going to the state fair. So they were like, the kids were like really excited. Mm-hmm. And it was like, I was standing between them and like the rides. It was like
dangerous position.
Dangerous position. And so, you know, the dad person was wearing Oakleys, wraparound Oakleys, and just refused to literally look at me, right? So I was standing in front of them, and instead of looking at me, he was standing like this. Normally not a good sign. But mom stopped to listen, and I just kind of like pointed out how we're doing this thing that is going to rebate about $750 to every Oregonian. I did some quick math for the 5 of them. It was right, $3,750. And as soon as I said that number, I stopped talking, and she just reached over, grabbed the clipboard, and signed her name on the petition. Right? You don't. If you're trying to convince someone or sell someone, you're doing it wrong, right? People understand, which is how we drafted this ballot initiative, right? Because people understand too. Like, we all know these things, right? We all know our personal experience and the financial pressure that we're under. And so there's beauty in like not talking a lot, even though I'm talking a lot, sorry, and just like letting people find their own voice.
Be weird if they brought you on stage just to listen. So.
Well, I actually have some like questions for like you all, by the way, because I thought
Old habits die hard.
And then there was another time early on where a member of the press asked for an interview, a newspaper writer, and I did a little bit of research, and this is like we had a strong feeling that this was not going to be a positive or a positive interview. But okay, fine. We talk to anybody. And so this person calls me, and they're just hammering me, right, for like 20 minutes, and like every question is like just super hard. So I'm doing the best, and at some point in time, I just kind of like pumped the brakes a little bit, and I turned it around, and I asked the reporter, well, what about you? Could you use $750? What would you do if you had $750? And to my surprise, a second or two later, the reporter started talking about how they would use the money, that the money would be great because they would finally be able to get all their teeth fixed at once. Apparently, he had some orthodontic work that he could only afford in piecemeal, and so he would have to I do not know, but it seemed like he would have a couple of teeth fixed at a time. Then he would get a little bit more money and then go back again. And this is annoying and sounds horrible. And so he went on for 15 minutes explaining this to me, which I thought was amazing, just super moving story. This is what we're doing. And And so then the answer was, okay, well, that's your story. Write that in the paper, because that's the important thing. And we ended the interview, and it never got published. But the point is that this person, like we were able to connect with this reporter who was sort of kind of anti, just because we brought him into the conversation. We presented a universe, or we allowed him space to imagine an existence where things would be a little bit better. And I'm going to use air quotes here, just with a little bit more money, right? So that's really kind of to me, that's beautiful. So.
Do we have time for one more question? Yeah.
Hello. Annie must have read my mind because I have the exact same question, and I suppose it's now more of a comment, but I'm really interested in the conversations as they evolve with the unions, and more specifically, whether you foresee unions putting their money behind this initiative and actually getting it passed, because I do think it's really important and groundbreaking. And I guess I see the tension between kind of the parallel fights with exploitation for some of these companies, and I don't know, I guess accurate or inaccurate, arguments could be made, even if fallacious, that'll disincentivize or impact bargaining. So I'm just really interested in how that conversation evolves, and who will materially support. So maybe not something you can answer today, but that I'm putting out there. But I'm also really interested in some of the strategies moving forward in your work, and very specifically, what partners you see at the table and how you'll engage to move this forward in the next 2 years. I think it's 150,000 signatures that you need, about. So I'm curious what you foresee in terms of organizing and strategy that will move this across the finish line.
Thank you. Just to touch real briefly on organized labor. So you made me think about the fight for $15 an hour minimum wage. Right, a lot of that was led by unions, and you're going to ask, well, why are you spending money not on your members? And it's because you care about society, and of course, if minimum wage goes up, then the wages of your members are going to also go up, right? So is the Ordinary People's Rebate that different from the fight for 15? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure. But it's important to also recognize that there's differences of opinion. So I know that some labor unions are in favor of Medicare for all, and some are not. And that's okay. We can hold that space and appreciate that we don't agree on everything, and we don't hate each other. So maybe that kind of nuances the conversation. I think that there's a ton of priorities, right? Today has been a day that Supreme Court national news, overturning Roe v. Wade, right? There's many things to work on. The Oregon People's Rebate is humbly not that big a deal in the greater scheme of the universe, right? We appreciate that, but we think that it's important enough to work on, right? We're going to reduce overall poverty in Oregon by 15%. With 4 pages of legislation, that's ridiculous. That's a big deal. But there are other big deals, and people have other things to work on. We totally respect that.
Yeah, I definitely expect seeing a lot of labor support from both organizations, but most importantly from membership, when we get a chance to speak directly to members who understand that money's coming directly into their pockets, and some unions whose families making $50,000, $60,000 a year or less. This is a significant raise for a family of four. And as far as the organizing goes, we've been building momentum, but natural partners who you reach out to, the labor movement is definitely one of them. Also, people that are concerned about hunger, uplifting people out of houselessness, uplifting people out of addiction, substance abuse issues, mental health treatment. All of these things can be helped by putting more money directly into families to help their situation. So we're going to continue working with individuals, advocates, definitely people who are concerned and want to bring forth basic income to people are definitely some of our bigger backers, but anybody that wants to uplift people in various communities, we're going to continue to reach out to those coalitions and keep building this from the ground up.
Awesome. Thank you. So this is, I think, the time to wrap up. So thank you for all attending, and thank you, Antonio and Anthony, for sharing so much of the Oregon People's Rebate with us. The recording of this session will be available on Crowdcast later, and the links can be found on the conference website. Please join us for the afternoon plenary session, Intersectionality of Movements, Basic Income as a Tool for Justice, in the main room, which will be followed by reflections and closing remarks to conclude the in-person programming for this year's conference. And then you can join us tomorrow on Saturday on Crowdcast for even more sessions as part of our virtual program. Information on how to join is available on our website.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.